The Magnolia Media Podcast is brought to you by RHR Productions. Welcome back to this episode of the Magnolia Media Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan M. Ruggiero. And today is finally the religion episode. When we started this podcast, it was largely focused on the African American community here in Knoxville, Tennessee. And as Tennessee is sort of the buckle of the Bible Belt, this is not going to be popular to local listeners, but we really haven't gotten any traction with local listeners. Most of our listeners are in the Northeast, on the West Coast, or in Europe. So I held off on doing this for a long time until the numbers showed, well, the people this podcast was designed to serve aren't listening. Even though we've heavily canvassed that part of the city to try and, gin up a little support. So today we're going to talk about the needlessness of religion, the danger it brings to the world, and the countless examples going on right now. But before we dive into the most divisive topic in the world, we have to speak a little bit on how things just changed in the North Carolina gubernatorial race, as Republican Mark Robinson, a rather grotesque man already, who was way behind his Democratic rival Mark Stein. Now that gap will grow even wider as new revelations about Robinson have come to the fore. Where to even begin with this one? It turns out these new revelations about Robinson are his comments made on a porn site that are, well, disgusting. He called himself a, quote, black Nazi and said, quote, some people should be slaves. He said, quote, I support slavery. And apparently he has a preference for transgender porn. And look, I don't care what sort of pornography a politician watches, but in Robinson's case, I find it especially disturbing that he has such a hatred for the trans community, in fact, the entire LGBTQ community, but spends his time enjoying transgender pornography to just unwind, I guess. In the latest polls, Robinson was down somewhere between 5 and 7 points to his Democratic rival. I'd expect that number to explode as the revelations dominate the airwaves in North Carolina. Robinson is a hand-picked and endorsed candidate by, you guessed it, convicted felon Dementia J. Trump. The Harris campaign has already released a stinging ad in the North Carolina market tying the two men together and highlighting Trump's own perversions. The thrice-married sexual assailant who boasted about grabbing women by the pussy. I apologize for my language there. He's also been found liable for sexual assault and apparently has an affinity for porn stars, one of which landed him in hot water in New York State as he tried to hide it from the American people just ahead of the 2016 election, and was found guilty on 34 counts. However, he has yet to be sentenced. Judge Brashan bending over backward to keep from having to confront Donald Trump, at least while Donald Trump is a candidate for president. As for Mark Robinson and his disgusting comments that are tied directly to him, he can use every old excuse in the book. I was hacked. That's not me. It's not my picture. It's not this. It's not that. When we know that it is. Internet sleuths have already proven without a shadow of a doubt Mark Robinson is responsible for what was written on that website. Something porn, Africa porn, something. It's disgraceful, especially when he stands on stage, all 600 pounds of him, and bashes the LGBTQ community. But that's where we are, and that's where Republicans are. So, don't take this ass whipping you're about to get in North Carolina personally, as we Democrats are about to put it on you. Harris is already up by 2 in the formerly red state, and Biden only lost the state by a little more than 2 in 2020. Before we move on into the religion portion of this podcast, I want to say this. I live 45 minutes from the North Carolina border. As soon as you get into North Carolina, traveling along I-40 west to east, you come across the town of Asheville, North Carolina, situated beautifully in the spectacular Blue Ridge Mountains. It is one of the loveliest cities, its size, in the entire nation. It's a highly educated city and perhaps the most liberal city in the Southeast. Now, others will say it's Austin, Texas, but I don't consider Austin, Texas to be in the Southeast. It's in the Southwest, or somewhere in the middle. But to be firmly in the South, Asheville, North Carolina, is one of the most progressive and accepting cities anywhere in the country. Around here, we call it the San Francisco of the southeastern United States. Asheville, North Carolina is also home to, well, a lot of hippies. And I mean hippies, not hipsters. It's sort of a hippie haven. And the University of North Carolina at Asheville is an elite university requiring almost perfect grades for acceptance for out-of-state students. I know because I applied with a rather solid GPA and wasn't even put on a wait list. I was flatly denied acceptance. It's a beautiful campus, too. But now, on to the topic of the day, religion. The poison that has haunted man since the first person decided they could gain an advantage over someone else by using religion as a weapon. Religion has been viewed by many around the world as a good thing. Unless, of course, you're a Muslim living in India or China. Judaism is viewed favorably. Unless, of course, you're in any Muslim nation on earth or in the company of the proud Nazi supporters of convicted felon Dementia J. Trump. On top of that, Trump says that you're a bad Jew if you don't vote for him, and that there will be a price to pay if you're not a good Jew. Boy, if that isn't the speech of someone who's trying to mimic Adolf Hitler, I don't know what is. And of course we know from the interview with Ivana Trump in 1990 that Donald Trump keeps a book of Hitler's speeches. It's not Mein Kampf, according to Trump. It's just a book of assorted speeches by Adolf Hitler in his bedside table drawer. So, how does one become a, quote, good Jew in Trump's world? By abandoning your right to choose your own candidate and instead vote for him because he's, well, threatening you. He reminds Americans of Jewish faith to vote for him or their country will be destroyed by Hamas. What? Okay, anyway. Insinuating that American Jews really don't care about their home nation, the United States of America, but are tied to Israel. Inextricably tied to Israel, even those who are non-practicing Jews and wouldn't visit Israel for $1,000 free air travel. It doesn't interest them, and of course, it's one of the most dangerous places on earth. And the government there, well, they are a rather disgusting group of pigs in and of themselves. Yet another anti-Semitic trope by the former president. More to the point of today's show is the needlessness of religion. In a 21st century world, religion became irrelevant when scientists discovered why the wind blows, why the seas are choppy at certain times, and why and when it rains. Science has explained beautiful sunsets. It has explained all of the colors that we see when we look out over the ocean as the sun sets. Science has explained all of those things that seem rather trivial and simple to a scientist who studies that particular field. But it has remained a pervasive part of our lives because of those who seek power over others. From the Pope to Billy Graham when he was alive, religion has been used the same way it was used when it was first invented. A god or a set of gods for the purpose of this show. Let's say 3,000 gods have existed in the past of our species. But one by one, they were dismissed. There was no need for a god of fire. There was no need for a god of the seas or a god of thunder, etc. However, societies all over the world are still plagued by the single god that withstood this dismissal of all others. Of course, I speak of the Abrahamic God, the God who serves no purpose, the God who doesn't bring rain, answer prayers, or free those who are suffering. This God is grotesque and a morbid God. When the pious talk about this impotent God, they are really describing a celestial dictator. A God who demands you spend your life on your knees worshiping him or risk being sent to hell. But he loves you. Oh no, not hell. The God who loves and forgives everyone so that the religious can spend eternity in heaven with child rapists, murderers, and thieves, because if they accept Jesus, a man who likely didn't exist, their sins will be washed away and they will be welcomed through the gates of heaven, despite the fact they hold these perversions deep in their heart. The lunacy of all of this, when you say it out loud, is embarrassing. This presents an entirely new reason to abandon religion. In the religious tradition in which I was raised, no matter the sin, as long as one asked for forgiveness, they too shall enter the gates of heaven. Once there, they can do as they did on earth and praise this impotent God all day, every day. That sounds like an awful, if not evil, way to spend eternity. And it sounds like a celestial North Korea. The difference is, when you die, you get to leave North Korea. But when you die in the Christian faith or Muslim faith or Jewish faith, that's when the fun just begins. Because that's when God really gets to start messing with you. It also proves that agnosticism really doesn't exist. One is an atheist if they are undecided. That is atheism. And it is truly freeing. There's no doubt I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders when I embraced the concept of science and accepted that science can't answer everything, but religion can answer absolutely nothing. This God allows 65 million of his, quote, children to live as starving, harassed, raped, and murdered to remain refugees? That's what he does? That's what he does with his children. He allows 65 million of them to be without a country, to be without any sense of safety or security. I digress. Any excuse or argument for God was useless after Darwin's correct assertion that man slowly evolved into the Homo sapiens we are today. Scientists have long ago determined the origins of man and have concluded that man is at least 100,000 years old or as old as 200,000 years. The beautiful thing about science versus religion is that science and scientists will openly say on day one they don't have all the answers. However, a priest or a pastor, an imam or a rabbi will not do the same. They will instead claim it's all, quote, part of God's plan. I've heard that so many times in my life growing up in the South, being forced into evangelical churches, and it's such unadulterated bullshit. My issue with religion began with the film Jurassic Park. I was 10 years old when I first saw it in theaters, and I fell instantly in love with dinosaurs. At that point, I had to go to this terrifying place called a Southern Baptist church on Sunday mornings. A place where screaming, shouting, people crying and rolling around, and stomping up and down aisles because the Holy Spirit had gotten to them. Ugh, the Holy Spirit. No, they just had a screw loose. There's a difference. We would arrive at our little church and enter through a side door. The Sunday school teacher, with whom I had been placed, was the first person I asked about dinosaurs after seeing the movie Jurassic Park. I don't remember her exact answer, but I know it was unsatisfactory to me. Yes, at 10 years old, or a 10-year-old version of me, said to himself, this is all of a sudden seems like bullshit. Up to that point, I have to admit that I had taken it serious. It was something that my parents pushed, and of course the people who raised me, my grandparents, pushed. So I tried to have some faith. I gave it a shot up until age 9 or 10. That same Sunday, the dangerously obese pastor gave a sermon on the 7 deadly sins. Gluttony was one of those sins. And to this day, this is one of the fattest men I've ever seen who wasn't bound to a wheelchair. Think about that for a moment. A man preaching on gluttony and the 7 fatal sins, 7 mortal sins, 7 deadly sins, is preaching to you red-faced and full of fire about controlling these instincts. Probably tips the scales at over 500 pounds. I've even seen the man pound his chest at church cookouts potlucks that were held in the church basement so that he could fit in just one more slice of pie. As if he hadn't had enough pie for everyone in the entire state of Tennessee at that point in his life. That's when the proverbial, quote, shit hit the fan. The following Sunday, I again asked about dinosaurs to the Sunday school teacher. The Sunday school teacher then took away the dinosaur toys that had been available to us. This, well, it pissed me off. She too had been in the pews the previous Sunday, nodding in agreement, when the grotesque beast that was our pastor talked about those 7 sins. She herself had a son in our Sunday school class, and like the minister, he was incredibly obese. For 8 years old, he was perhaps the fattest 8-year-old I have ever seen. I couldn't help myself. In my anger and disappointment that she dismissed dinosaurs altogether and had seemingly agreed with every word the glutton had said about those made-up sins that would certainly send one to hell, I decided to say this. If being incredibly fat is a mortal sin, then why don't you put your son, Tyler, on a diet or something? She admonished me politely, but I was looking for a fight. So I went on to mention the trouser braces that she had dressed him in. They were so tight, I feared that they would snap and injure other children sitting nearby. I actually said this out loud. I said, his suspenders are so tight because he's so fat that I'm afraid that one of them might snap and injure one of the students sitting nearby. Causing a little bit of trouble. Then I saw the twinge of rage in her stupid eyes. I don't mean she was exceptionally stupid, but I find myself classifying anyone who attends such a radical church as stupid. Again, I was 10 years old. Suddenly, I felt a twinge of pain across my cheek as she backhanded me, and her ring cut the corner of my mouth. In a few moments, my mother entered the room. My biological mother has seldom supported me in any way, and I'm not sure if she took offense at the idea of someone smacking her boy or if she was just mad she wasn't called to do it. After a verbal altercation, I was rushed down the hall just outside the chapel. The church elders had arrived. The teacher was the only person allowed to give a report on what had happened. I was to be excused from Sunday school, encouraged to waste time praying, and told that fossils could be made in a large trash compactor in 100 years. My God, I rest my case. They also told me that oil could be produced in a trash compactor in 100 years. Not 100 million years, not 100,000 years. In 100 years, we could have all the oil we need by simply using a trash compactor. They had read some conspiratorial article in a paper published by the late Jerry Falwell. Thankfully, he's not around anymore, although his son, Jerry Falwell Jr., is the spiritual advisor to convicted felon Dementia J. Trump. What, he really turned out to be something special, didn't he? I mean, the reasons to dismiss religion out of pocket are all around us. And I don't mind one having personal faith. If you want to have faith, great. If it gives you some sustenance, good. If it helps you get off drugs or alcohol, great. But check it out the door. This Supreme Court we have currently has decided they're going to take the position of only 15% of the American public and try to impose some sort of Christo-fascism on the rest of us. And to that I say, F you. We will not have it. We will not have it. Especially those of us in the fastest growing demographic of people who, when polled, are asked what religion they subscribe to, and they check the box, none of the above. That's who I'm doing this episode for. That's who I will fight for. That is my group of people. Skeptics. Those who look at the cosmos and see something fantastic and beautiful. What they don't see is a bearded old man sitting on a cloud somewhere. This form of religion, this Abrahamic form of religion, whether it's Islam, Judaism, or Christianity, is so outdated. It's so tired, and it's so ridiculous that we're still living with this cabal hanging around our necks, hovering over our heads, 2,000 years after these stories were made up by the Roman Senate. That's right. In 212 AD, the Roman Senate made the decision as to whether or not Jesus Christ would be viewed as just another man or a man with magical powers, like healing the blind and, the whole story of Lazarus, or walking on water, or turning water into wine. Whatever. You get my point. Later, my actual mother, being my maternal grandmother, the woman who raised me, saw the bruise from the smack I had taken that same day. She asked if I had hit anyone, and both my mother and I confirmed I had been rowdy but not violent. My grandmother was 6 feet in height. She had grown up atop a mountain in a little farm town. This was during the time TVA was just bringing in dams to make sure electricity could be extended to, all of the homes in the South. So, as a child, she was raised in an environment that had been the same for over 100 years. There was no difference in her being raised in the 1940s atop that mountain as there would have been if she had been raised in the 1840s. I think they even used cap-lock muskets to go deer hunting. They couldn't afford modern weapons, so they used weapons that were 70 or 80 years old. Anyway, after she noticed that I had been backhanded and had a busted lip from it, she reacted. And again, describing the way she was raised, the way she was brought up, she was also as tough as a knot in a hickory tree. The following Sunday, we were removed as members of this cult when my grandmother arrived at the church with my grandfather in the car. He sat still, as she would only be a minute. She marched down the long, narrow hallway and found the 7 to 10-year-old classroom. Once there, she asked to see the teacher. Upon entering the hall, she began to speak, that being the teacher. But the teacher never saw the fist that would leave her unconscious and bleeding from the mouth. As she left the church, one of the deacons said something, cherry-picking, as they always do, from the Bible, to which my grandmother said in retort, quote, "It also says an eye for an eye, Jim. An eye for an eye." It would be a year Before I ever lived with my parents, I had never lived with them up to the age of 12. And my mother tried forcing that fiction on me again. This time it ended in an even worse way. I'll save that story for another time. But it's fair to say that I was a non-believer, or my journey to atheism began that Sunday after Jurassic Park 30 years ago. The rest of what I'll talk about today is largely taken from Dr. Lawrence Krauss, Dr. Richard Dawkins, Dr. Sam Harris, and the one and only non-scientist of the group, but likely the smartest man in any room in which he entered, Christopher Hitchens. I borrow a lot from these great minds because they can conjure the best references as to why religion is such a waste of time. They also talk about why and how the world would almost instantly improve if the Abrahamic religion just disappeared. That is the substance of today's show. First, the largest growing religion in the world is, quote, none of the above. Just like I said before, Pew Research concluded that 1 in 3 Americans have no religious affiliation. In the year 1900, the same company, Pew, found that 97% of Americans identified as having a strong religious belief. I call this progress. It's progress when people stop going, don't you think? Yes, I think so. Everyone is nodding in agreement. When Dr. Krauss takes the stage to debate the cosmos with someone who graduated from a Bible college, he instantly seems both frustrated, disappointed, and as if he needn't be there. If people like this are the best religious the religious community can produce for a debate. A man with the IQ and background of Lawrence Krauss debating someone who graduated from Bible college. Given his years of studies, his professorships at prestigious universities, and his time researching the cosmos, he is in that moment being asked to academically dismantle this man, and it's always a man, to sell more books. It's part of book tours. It's part of what writers do. I'd also be quick to reference the God Delusion, a book by the great Richard Dawkins. And the best of them all, God is Not Great, Religion Poisons Everything, a novel by the great Christopher Hitchens. And no, you may not call him Chris. A little joke from when he was still alive. It will be Christopher or Mr. Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens said, even as he was sick and dying, giving his last interviews to CNN and a variety of other news outlets that came to his apartment in the Kalorama district in Washington, D.C. to see him as he dwindled away. And at no point did he ever say, just in case I'm going to embrace religion, just in case I'm going to decide that, I want to be on God's good side, in case I do, in fact, in case I was wrong my entire life. Never. He did not decry. He did not turn back on his principles. He stuck with reality. And though he's not with us anymore, I can often hear his sharp and pointed voice, his incredible intellect, and some of the speeches I've heard time and time again, thanks to YouTube. We are very fortunate that YouTube existed in the lifetime of Christopher Hitchens. I encourage each of you, especially you progressives out there who listen to this podcast, to look up Lawrence Krauss. To look up, well, we all know Neil deGrasse Tyson, but also Sam Harris, one of the most impressive academics out there, and a personal guru to Professor Scott Galloway. And again, this doesn't mean that you have to or need to harbor hatred for the religious. It just means that they need to mind their own damn business. The revulsion and the repulsion of religion by Americans as we see everyone from ministers in the Southern Baptist Convention who were raping children to priests of the Roman Catholic Church who were raping children, as we see that in basically every major religion in the country, as we see their coarse behavior and their endorsement of insane and completely unacceptable candidates for office like President of the United States, we know that it's nothing more than poison. It's a way to get at your money, because God might be all-knowing. He might have invented the cosmos, the universe, the stars. He might have invented black holes and black matter, the planet Earth, the atmosphere, everything else. But he can't handle money. Can we get God a check, please? That's what this is all about. All of this is about money, power, and influence. That's why we have people in this country like Doug Coe, the man responsible for the National Prayer Breakfast. The candidate who would get my support above any other would be the presidential candidate who came out and said, look, I have no religion at all. And Kamala Harris has come as close to that as anyone I've seen run for president. Someone who seems to have respect for those who are pious, as her mother was likely a practicing Hindu, her father likely a practicing Christian. But she, raised in Oakland, California, is likely identifies as an agnostic, despite the fact agnosticism is not a real thing. You either believe or you don't. Religion is a zero-sum game, and it's a game in which I am not interested in playing. Well, that does it for me. Again, I'm your host, Jonathan M. Ruggiero. You've been listening to the Magnolia Media Podcast. If you want to support our podcast, please go to patreon.com/the Magnolia Media Network. It's $5. When we get to 500 people, I'll start doing a weekly newsletter sent just to you guys, and we'll start putting some content behind that paywall, talking more about religion, talking about fashion, talking about politics, talking about the world that others won't have access to. You can also follow my Instagram page where we do a lot of content, and I post a lot of lives and a lot of video at Magnolia John 2024. This is the year of our founding, 2024. You'll see my goofy caricature pointing up at the Magnolia Avenue street sign, and you know you found the right place. So until next time, be well, won't you?